All right, thank you all for coming for the last panel of the day, the Cloud Infrastructure Insights. My name is Tim Horan. I'm a cloud analyst at Oppenheimer Communications, so I study the industry a lot from a financial services perspective. And the industry right now, I think cloud infrastructure is one of the most dynamic period I've ever seen. And I've been following kind of cloud communications infrastructure for 20 years. If you look at the FANG stocks alone, they're spending $100 billion a year on infrastructure. It's growing in the range of 20% per year for the last kind of decade. I don't know if that'll kind of keep going, given the law of large numbers, but it's still a huge, huge amount of money. So we're, and I'm just hearing like incredible amounts of innovation, changes to data center designs, changes to lots of new niches out there, lots of changes on the fiber optic side. So I think we're in for a really, really great conversation here. And I'll just do a quick introduction to everyone, and they'll go back and kind of talk about themselves a little bit in their company. To my left is Michael Foust from Chindata Group, Craig Scroggie from NEXTDC Limited, Chris Sharp from Digital Realty, and Toby Williams, who's from euNetworks. And I guess we'll start out with you, Michael. Can you talk a little bit about your company and what your niche is in the market?
Sure, thank you, Tim. We're Chindata Group. We are the combination of Chindata and Bridge Data Centers outside of China. And so we merged together earlier in 2019, and we're operating in Beijing region, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Kuala Lumpur, as well as our new project in Mumbai. So we're in the process of executing at about 200 megawatts in China right now and about 50 megawatts outside of China. So our focus is on Asia, big emphasis on China, obviously, and on India with the very large demographics. And we'll also look at other markets, including Jakarta. We're led by Alex Ju, our CEO, who's based in Beijing. And we're really a hyperscale campus developer. And we also have content distribution background, CDN background in our DNA. So we're very focused on network and co-location and peering in our Beijing operation.
Great, Craig.
Thanks, Tim. So Craig Scroggie, CEO of NEXTDC. So NEXTDC is in its 10th year of operation. So it was founded as a publicly listed company back in late 2010 by Bevan Slattery. The company has built all of its data centers, currently 10, and another couple under development this year. So more than 60 megawatts built out, 300 megawatts worth of development pipeline. We build UTI Tier 3 and UTI Tier 4 certified data centers, and we focus on enterprise and hyperscale. So we've got a bifurcated business model, but very focused on ultimately developing that deep, rich ecosystem of clients that are looking to take advantage of the cloud on-ramps, but build ecosystems and communities inside our data centers. So we operate in every major city around Australia, and we've got 2 or 3 facilities in each capital.
Chris?
Absolutely. Chris Sharp with CTO of Digital Realty. So essentially, Digital Realty is one of the largest platform operators in the world, and what's included inside of that platform is both hyperscale facilities where we have a single facility inside of Ashburn that's over 100 megawatts, and we go in the other direction where we have colo capabilities and extensive internet gateways that we run all throughout the world. But essentially, all of that is brought together by our interconnection capabilities. And so what's represented to the customer base is a full comprehensive product portfolio that you can go from a hyperscaler all the way down to that heavy colo, very ecosystem focused prosecution of interconnection between the two. And so essentially what Digital has been able to do with our interconnection portfolio of products is bring together what we think is the most efficient cloud supply chain as either a buyer or seller in the market today, and that's in every major economic epicenter in the globe.
Okay.
Toby?
Thanks. Toby Williams, Head of Products at euNetworks. euNetworks is a pan-European bandwidth infrastructure provider. We operate metro duct fiber networks in 17 cities around Europe, and our long-haul network extends to roughly 51 cities. We're really very focused on data center connectivity. Roughly 85% of our revenues have at least one end if not both, in a data center and a significant part of that customer base and growing, I suppose, in the hyperscale environment.
And maybe, so we really have the dream team here of cloud infrastructure. We're covering the whole world between fiber, every kind of data center you could possibly need, Australia, China, and the Far East. So great insights. Can you maybe talk a little bit, we'll start with you, Michael, about the overall demand environment and, particularly as it relates to China, because we don't get a huge amount of that in the United States, what's going on with China and the Asia in particular?
Right. The demand is explosive in China right now. And if you'll see the demand drivers, everything from cloud adoption, software as a service, infrastructure as a service. You see gaming, streaming, AI related, social networking. TikTok, for example, is like the latest and huge growing social networking phenomenon. And we take advantage of that by being very highly vertically integrated in our operations. So it allows us to be able to deploy quickly, which is what our customers are really looking for, because it's very, very difficult for them to gauge their growth because it is so fast. So be able to have that just-in-time development with our in-house engineering, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, architectural design, even civil engineering in-house. So we can create both bespoke or using our best practices for our customers. But it's, we're looking at 200 megawatts now and pipeline of another 100 on top of that today. So, and I would say the growth, we're in the early stages. I would say we're probably in the, baseball analogy, the third or fourth inning in China today.
Craig? The overall demand environment.
Yeah, so I think obviously Australia is quite a close reflection of where the US market is in terms of its maturity, maybe delayed by a year or two, but it's always been the first place the majority of those will go when they're expanding out through Asia. It's an easier entry point. And we've seen really the first wave of mature cloud deployment and adoption by the majority of the major platforms, and we're really in the second wave. So the larger scale, where we were 5 to 10 years ago, a large scale cloud order would have been in the megawatt type size range. Now, in Australia, it's still a relatively small market as a percentage of the global landscape, but those 1 megawatt orders have very quickly become 10 megawatt orders or greater. And the major geography that supports the bulk of cloud deployments is Sydney, and that market has well in excess of 300 to 400 megawatts worth of compute deployed. And I think that as we go through this second wave, it's the very beginning. I think we'll see an order of magnitude shift in the next 5 years, essentially half the time, and one order of magnitude faster and larger than what we would have seen before.
Wow. What do you think, Chris?
No, absolutely. I think, taking a bit of a different view, being global, you really get to see the full aspect of a lot of the services we've been talking about today, be it TikTok or ByteDance coming out of China, being able to provide them the right product to solve for their needs, be it hyperscale, be it interconnectivity, or be it a smaller footprint. Just honing in on the one vertical, which is cloud, it's very robust, right? And I think one way to think about it is IaaS was kind of the first front or the first wave of cloud infrastructure coming to market. I would say some of the stuff that we've seen in the market as SaaS or software as a service, that's been the second wave, which is still growing. And the SaaSification of all the different sectors is ongoing, and we don't see that ending anytime soon. But the next wave, which requires, I think Mike was alluding to this, a different type of design that's able to flex from a power density perspective, which is AI. And so artificial intelligence and some of the new chipsets coming together, which is something that we've been looking at and making sure that we could support that evolutionary path as these multiple waves of cloud infrastructure comes to market, that our designs are able to support that density in a very efficient manner on a global basis. Because it's a different narrative when I can go into any one of the cloud operators and start talking about XYZ application in 20, 30 markets, right? It's opposed to here's this one application and here's this regionalized kind of solution that we can provide you. And believe me, every one of these applications, and just to hone in on TikTok, it's one of the top talkers on the internet. It is a pervasive social media platform that requires an extensive amount of infrastructure to really efficiently deliver their services on an ongoing basis. And so being able to align with trends like that and support that infrastructure growth is something that we're very proud of. And then flip of the coin, providing an environment where enterprise can consume or either leverage that ecosystem to deliver their services. That's where that colo element next to the hyperscaler to enable that extremely efficient hybrid multi-cloud model, which is the desired architecture for a predominant amount of the enterprise customers out there. Being able to do all of that on both sides is just really setting us apart from, I think, a lot of the other strict infrastructure plays where providing that interconnection capability and doing it in a seamless fashion where you're removing complexity to capture that growth is what it's all about today.
And Toby, you've been at this a long time. How's the demand environment for fiber versus what you've seen historically?
I think overall, I mean, it's something that we say regularly in Europe. We see that bandwidth's doubling every year. Across our long-haul network last year, we installed more bandwidth than was installed in all previous years on our long-haul network. That's how fast demand is accelerating in real terms. And I think, first of all, that plays towards our strengths in terms of having dark fiber infrastructure and being able to support that growth from an infrastructure basis. And I think it also plays towards just having a very simplified business model. For us, we only do dark fiber, waves, and Ethernet. We want to try and do a very small number of things as very well as we possibly can because of the scaling that we're seeing. And so for us, I think that acceleration in demand is really coming towards us as a strategy.
And maybe working backwards with you again, Toby. Can you talk about maybe somewhere where the bottlenecks are? Like how is infrastructure deployment changing versus what you've kind of seen historically, Toby?
Well, I think if you go back a few years in the metro, there was a lot of focus on access networks, and what you saw is a lot of laterals, a lot of complexity, low fiber counts, and for us, the growth of the data center and the acceleration of demand that's really been centered around that growth of the data center has allowed us to take a much simpler approach. So within our metros, our BAU cable size these days is 864, but we've been deploying 432 fiber cables in the metro for a very long time. And in shorter stretches, within sub-10 kilometer type environments, campus environments, we're even going up to 1728, 3456 fiber strand cables, which are absolutely vast. And I think people are consuming fiber in a very different way than they used to. It used to be such a scarce resource that people were trying to engineer every single last bit out of a fiber pair. Whereas now people can see them like cross connects as if it's somewhere else within the data center. So I think it's a really enabling technology, and it's really allowing people to transform the way that they operate their networks.
And Chris, you would probably know this a little bit better, but I know, Toby, you're seeing some of this in the urban areas and in Europe anyway. It's hard to get power. So a lot of people now are moving out of the urban areas for a lot of the new builds. Is, I guess, that one of the bottlenecks in infrastructure, you think now, Chris?
It is, yeah. I mean, the campuses that we've had and known and loved, they've been there for 20 years, and they're sort of often quite central within the metro areas, and they just run out of space. They've run out of power, and so we're seeing a lot of growth outside of the metro, just really hunting out that power. Where can you get cheap and scalable power sources? So on the one level, we're seeing sort of medium-sized campuses of the 60 to 100 megawatt size popping up, but we're seeing plays even larger than that, where people are pushing for a whole gigawatt of power. And I think the real challenge is you need connectivity to complete that proposition, right? It needs to connect back to the existing campuses. People need to connect all of this infrastructure together, and there are latency and distance constraints against that as well. So on the one hand, you go far afield looking for power, but on the other, we're being pushed to dig straighter and straighter lines back to the existing campuses today, which is funny. I mean, we're market leaders in Europe for ultra-low latency, for high-frequency trading, and that's a skill set that we never really thought that we would see in any other sector, but actually we're now being pushed more and more to be able to guarantee builds within a certain length to make sure that the latency works for this new DC.
No, absolutely, and I think, said a bit differently, you can't overcome the speed of light, right? So no matter how fast your optronics are, if you start to separate from the existing campus, there is a loss of latency and capability there. And one of the things that I pride myself on in being a part of digital is the foresight that we put into master planning and building out some of the largest campuses in the world and having access to that power where we have unique opportunity beyond other providers in the market that might have started to build at a smaller rate or at a different rate. But being able to allow customers to continually leverage that campus because there is proximity. There's a lot of value in proximity, and there was some talks earlier today, and we've often referenced it with data gravity, right? People pay a premium to have proximity to the existing data sets because, as I alluded to with infrastructure or artificial intelligence, that new infrastructure wants to reside in proximity to that existing infrastructure. So be it that more and more cables, more and more optical is being laid, there is still a benefit to that proximity, but everything has to be heavily interconnected. And that's also one of the things we spend a lot of time on with looking at the conduits, because there's one project in particular for a customer I can't mention, 17,000 fiber pairs day one within the metro. And I lost a bet where I didn't think they would light them all up day one, and they did. And they're looking for infinite bandwidth, right? And that's what the mentality is out there, because there's such a dependency between all of this infrastructure in the market. And so being able to provide a land and expand capability not only for their infrastructure, but also the enterprises that are consuming it, it's a cyclical cycle that the more efficiency you can apply to that, it's definitely a differentiator.
17,000 day one. I remember when 100 was like unthinkable. And 17,000 day one, that means we're getting up to 100,000 at some point.
Yeah.
Which is
Some of these cores they're throwing in are impressive.
Craig, maybe can you talk about the bottlenecks that you're seeing down in Australia, how difficult it is for you to build out, and is power an issue down there, and is green power a big issue for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think in the majority of cases, not just in Australia, but in the majority of major markets, I mean, power's become a key issue, and I don't know that anyone really would have been able to foresee 10 years ago that when we were planning 1 to 10 megawatt data centers, that we'd be planning 100 to 150 or 200 megawatt campuses. And if you take a slightly longer term view today, when we look at larger markets, we do think that you'll see half a gigawatt or gigawatt type campuses become quite the norm.
Wow.
Supporting requirements within the next 5+ years. Now, the amount of supporting power infrastructure that's required to be able to serve those is not in place, and will need to be built. And clearly, as those larger amounts of power are consumed, the source of power itself becomes quite controversial, and we're seeing right across the industry, whether it's us as developers and builders of data centers, or customers as consumers and builders of the cloud products themselves, making a conscious decision to put sustainability first. And that drives a very different buying behaviour when it comes to planning for the energy requirements, not just the support for the infrastructure. So I think whilst the growth in fibre, and we see exactly the same thing happening in our fibre networks and elastic cross-connect business, the same complexity will be true in power, but slightly more complicated to solve, not only because of the infrastructure, but because of the renewable nature of what will be required.
And Michael, what's your big bottleneck to getting infrastructure deployed?
We see there's a lot of always challenges, especially around network. And in some countries, there's regulatory hurdles that are tough to jump over, in places like India and Malaysia in particular. So those are challenges that take boots on the ground to be able to work with the telecoms, work with the political agencies to be able to solve those issues. In China, we have very deep relationships, Alex, Ju, and our team, with the carriers, and we've joint ventured in developing our own dark fiber networks, connecting all of our regional campuses and then back to Beijing to our peering point. And so we're achieving less than 1 millisecond latency from our campuses pretty far outside of Beijing. So we're able to get power readily and sustainable power, especially from wind, and then be able to connect that to our own network of both dark and lit fiber. Dark fiber is really difficult to get in a lot of places around the world, and we find that's a challenge for a lot of our large cloud infrastructure customers, whether it's in the US or China or India, getting that dark fiber back to where they need it. So that's a big investment that we've made and will continue to make at Chindata, is coupling the fiber, dark and lit services back to the peering points.
And just out of curiosity, are you seeing much demand from large US cloud domiciled companies going into China or Asia?
It's starting. More companies that have been in China for a long time, and they're expanding their service offerings. I think my sense is there's a lot of very strong competition from domestic companies in China that make it challenging for international companies to break in. But we're seeing more and more that, and I think the loosening of the financial services regulations that we're seeing right now will maybe help promote a little bit more. But we're very happy to serve our international customers coming in, and the demand domestically is almost overwhelming right now. So it's a good spot.
So a lot of the cloud companies kind of have really been the innovative driving forces behind virtualization, broadly speaking, of compute, which is enabled cloud, but also now, of networking. Broadly speaking, I know it's a high-level question, but maybe we'll start with you, Toby. How has this kind of changed cloud infrastructure, the whole virtualization, and where are we in this process? And is it starting to get down to the network layer at this point, do you see?
Well, I think it is, insofar as looking at that access network sort of topology and the gravitation of data towards the data center. I think as a first step, we've seen data center connectivity become fundamentally more important. And I think now we're starting to see that abstraction between even the end user and the data center. So it's very much moving from what used to be a relationship where you owned a data center and you got the data out of that data center to you're putting the data in a cloud and you're putting it out of the cloud, and in between is just some connectivity. So it's definitely changing in that relationship.
And Chris, how has virtualization changed how you build buildings now and operate?
No, absolutely. There's not a layer in the architecture that hasn't benefited from some type of virtualization or some type of intelligence extracted from it to represent a higher level understanding of what's going on in the facility. And that's something that we've been focused on for many years now, and the fact that it's a very complicated architecture to achieve, which is this hybrid multi-cloud, and putting the data in the clouds, and they want to use multiple clouds. And that's one of the things that we worked extensively a couple of years ago to bring the Service Exchange to market with our partner Megaport, and it's the largest SDN interconnected fabric in the world today. But at the end of the day, what it's done at that level of the network and with our infrastructure is it's removed complexity from the customer. So now a customer, 4 years ago when we started that, I would say over 70% of these aspirations to achieve that design failed because of the complexity. And so with that SDN capability and being able to automate through all of the major public cloud providers globally, you can pick and choose and do a hybrid multi-cloud solution within our facilities in the matter of minutes globally. Right? That's every availability zone that every one of the top major cloud providers operate. 3 years ago, that would have been a science project with multiple engineers, and it would have taken a couple of months. And so today, most enterprises can achieve that in a very simplistic manner. So just that use case and how it's advanced just from an SDN type of SDN type of capability, and then the virtualization of the infrastructure and the visibility you get out of the infrastructure in our facilities, it's absolutely paramount to us because customers aren't coming in and wanting to buy space and power. Like that conversation's over. It's, hey, I have this data analytics and I need to mine data over here in this cloud and I have a data store here. How do I tie all this together? And oh, by the by, I kind of need 10 cabinets today. I might need a megawatt tomorrow. Because that's really what we're seeing is the enterprise and larger enterprise don't know how to size it. And so being able to land and expand where you can flex to the right product offering to meet the economic requirements and also the structural requirements of it, all being, providing that visibility across that is absolutely paramount.
And Craig, do you think this concept of hybrid cloud and flexibility, is that very important to your customer conversations?
Absolutely. I mean, for us, we're really heavily focused on the enterprise first, and we built a business around helping the enterprise customer get to the cloud, manage their legacy infrastructure, but sort of build on Chris's point, but a slightly different view, and that is that I see more complexity in the network than less, in the context that we may have simplified the customer's ability to be able to transition to the network, but the privacy and data regulations that sit around where my data goes, who has access to it, is it encrypted, what country would it reside in, what country's laws then have access to that information, has created a level of complexity that we've never really had to consider before, because inside the enterprise, when I controlled all the data myself, I may not have had the same set of skills that are available in third-party providers today, but at least it resided with me. And there's a level of complexity that has been introduced into the enterprise as a result of having this multiplicity of hybrid cloud services, and the data management layer and how you think about building your data lakes and where the data is moving is a very complex problem. And I think there's levels of complexity that are yet still to be solved. Networking being one that has become more ubiquitous, but it has pushed the data problem to a greater extent.
And Michael, maybe just one layer up from that. China's obviously a leader in AI, and they got massive amounts of data. I just saw a scary app today that you can download and take a picture of someone, and they'll tell you who they are and everything about them. It's kind of, but I think in China that's probably pretty commonplace right now. But I'm not an expert on what's going on over there. But how is AI and the virtualization? How has it changed how you design data centers? Are you using just
A lot more, Ed, as other folks have been chatting about, a lot more flexibility around densities. And our customers aren't quite sure yet how dense is optimal. And so we have to be able to design our data centers to be able to accommodate some of these very large data sets and machine learning, AI, heavy computational applications that are very dense power. And we're able to do it some very clever cooling mechanical system innovations where we're able to do it without, oftentimes without liquid cooling yet to the cabinets, and still accommodate some very high density. Because AI and everything, the social media is all huge AI platform. You look at the TikToks of the world, huge AI, and those AI applications are being applied to everywhere, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's other statistical analyses, biotech. I mean, they're all dealing with giant data sets and very high density compute. So that's an area we're definitely focused on.
So Chris, with all this high density compute, are you seeing changes to basically how you deploy power and cooling, and are you seeing a lot of innovation there? And can you retrofit stuff that was built 5-10 years ago to kind of take advantage of this?
Yeah, you're spot on, right? Where you have to have variability within your design, and more importantly, in a lot of our facilities where you can go back and retrofit, the capability to support that higher density. And I think one of the other elements I would put a finer point on, it's not only supporting the density, but the interconnection requirements with a lot of this AI requires it to sit next to the existing infrastructure, because they're doing analytics against an existing data set, and often it's multiple data sets across multiple clouds, which is nice when you can come into a campus like Digital's, you have access to these oceans of data, and we can support your high power density, high interconnectivity requirements associated with your workload. And you know, some of the stuff we've seen, and we've done an extensive amount of work with NVIDIA, we're DGX certified, and I think roughly 12 facilities around the globe. That's one of the leading kind of platforms out there that's starting to really come into market, because it's often misunderstood that AI chipsets inside of the public cloud is one of the most expensive things you can rent. So said a bit differently, the ROI of owning that is very important to customers, and it requires a larger footprint to support a lot of these designs, which is right in our sweet spot. And so we're seeing a lot of customers come out, build their own AI, be it NVIDIA or any chipset, and really looking at, hey, I want to start low, but quickly do they ramp up, where you'll see, you know, 20, 35 kilowatt per rack, and we see some stuff even flexing in the 100 kilowatts over time in some of the R&D labs. But we absolutely have a natural progression to be able to support that density over time with our current designs, because if you look at it from the other perspective, if you deploy day one with a tremendous amount of power and high density, you're stranding tons of capital, and it's just not efficient. So being able to come back in and retrofit that and support that evolutionary path, which we still believe, like, the third wave of the cloud is AI, and there's not a company out there that this is the R&D investment front to have a little bit of a key infrastructure to be successful and have your foothold in who's going to win. So every name brand we've talked about today, they have massive investments in AI.
Well, we're just about out of time, but I was joking with the panel and Chris before we got in here. When we're starting to build 100 kilowatts per rack, you're going to need basically a spacesuit to go walk in those facilities and work on that equipment. That's just, you know, unbelievable.
Absolutely.
But great job, guys. Thanks for developing the cloud and enabling all these great applications, and thank you all for listening. Have a great day.
Thank you.